So it's sorry for the pause. I was looking at my timer and hoping it would start counting, but it took like a second. So I was kind of staring into space for a while. Um, so I haven't made a video in about 3 weeks, and I'm feeling like there needs to be one made. Um, I have um, I have a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, and maybe this video could go on for an hour, 2 hours. I don't know. Like, I mean, it could. I really should get better with my note taking, but my Facebook page is like my notebook, so I'm gonna try my best. Um, anyway, the real reason I got kind of in this moment inspired to make a video is because of this latest podcast from Revolution, and they were talking to somebody called Sarah Nicholson, and she actually I mean, the description of the podcast was just so kind of like filled with these personal buzzwords of mine, and even situations that related to me. So, like, things like graduating from Ryerson, having an undergraduate degree from Ryerson, and things like talking about sexism. And I have no affiliation with mechanical engineering, but sexism as it relates to intersectionality, et cetera, et cetera. Even her personal story is kind of very close to other people I've befriended, and even a little bit resembling my story a bit. I'm an old guy though. I'm 37, so I mean, I'm kind of I'm kind of like way ahead of her in age, but I mean, she seemed to have had um, very similar things happen to her. Early on she had a very religious upbringing, and she had which she kind of ditched and became. She never specifically said atheists, but she did kind of mention listening to Sam Harris's podcast and kind of leaving fundamental Christianity. So, yeah, I just read the description. It just really popped up on my Facebook page, and I thought, I read the description and I thought, this is probably going to be a little bit uncomfortable to listen to because these words in the description, just kind of popped out at me, and I thought, well, maybe she has something to say about intersectionality. But to my relief, and I'll admit I was a bit relieved, she said that she's still toying with the idea of intersectionality. So she's still looking at how that can be applied in a productive way. And I think the one thing I got from the podcast, it was episode, sorry, uh, oops, Reason Revolution, and it was episode 19. Anyway, so the overarching sort of thing I got from the podcast is that there needs to be more literacy. And I mean, by the time you're in university, I mean, you're talking about literacy in a way that kind of not necessarily means like reading and writing on a basic level, but literacy in terms of like cross pollinating fields and real intellectualism at its finest. Basically, like having a grand, almost like a Renaissance kind of view of the world. You kind of you have these cross pollinations of different professions and classes and things like that. And she even mentioned having like um, a philosophy of mechanical engineering class that she found very difficult. So I mean, it's kind of telling that we still find these kind of these intersections of professions and scholarly work still kind of running up against each other. Um, but she generally said that design, when it comes to mechanical engineering technology, and mechanical engineering, as she also mentioned, Sarah Nicholson kind of described mechanical engineering as this broad kind of field that she tries to apply to almost everything. But it really struck a chord with my whole idea that technology is actually a more efficient way of dealing with differences between people in terms of capability and disability and background and things like that, without invoking these kind of Freudian constructs of what people should be looking out for. And I mean, psychoanalysis is a bit, I think of a bit of a cumbersome thing to be walking around with in your daily goings on. Like, I mean, how much can you concentrate on in terms of your subconscious or your unconscious or however you want to say it? Um, it just seems very impractical. So 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 without getting too much into the intersectionality stuff right now anyway, I'd say that there's still this kind of like positive experience that could be gained from actually promoting equality, or even maybe through. And I think technology is offering a whole new slew of a whole slew of new ways that people interact with each other, disability or not. And I think the equalization of access and things like that are still, still issues, when it comes to things like poverty and et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, I don't mind on a personal level. I'm not saying I'm sort of like this authority on the thing, but from what I've read, I don't mind equality of representation in any field. So you think about something even like atheism, which is like kind of like my main gig on this site. It was a very sexist, and I'm not sure how deliberately, but I mean, atheism was a very sexist thing, like at the turn of the century, because I mean, while men were sort of like debating these things, these ideas about God, et cetera, women were at home, and maybe deliberately so, men kept the women out of these debates because, well, they didn't want them controlling, the democracy, and they kind of wanted to they kind of want, and women were traditionally religious anyway, so I mean, they didn't want that kind of influence in their democratic process, as being, atheist and versus the religiosity of women. So there's all these little things about atheism and women, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think we've gotten to a point where we all know we have equal rights. We all know we have these rights that are available to us. And I think there are a lot of setbacks with understanding those rights, in varied ways. I mean, you think about women and the women in alcoholism, and even women in homelessness, and all these things that kind of have these subtle kind of differences when it comes to the genders, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's all this. So I'm not saying that discrimination doesn't happen. I'm just saying that I feel that sometimes, back to the I word, intersectionality, I think kind of draws these things out of people to look for oppression or look for power. I mean, and you're almost kind of like you're almost like a fly in a fly trap, right? Like you kind of it kind of like it kind of like puts out these vapors that you kind of suck in, and then all of a sudden, you're caught in this big kind of like intersectional mess. Um, so I think intersectionality. I did make a video before promising I would never talk about intersectionality again, but it just keeps coming up, and it just keeps coming up and up and up, and I just had to say something about it again. Um, but overall, I totally lost my point. But overall, I think that we don't treat each other on for the majority of us, we don't treat each other differently, even while having like any of these unconscious biases, et cetera, I feel kind of melt away when you're in conversation with somebody, um, or even just interacting on a daily level. And again, just going back to my previous point, intersectionality kind of draws these things you got to be conscious of, and I think it kind of holds them up to the light, and then you're kind of fishing for things, but maybe literacy is the answer to that too. I don't know. But I'm just saying implicit bias is not an easy thing to just solve. But technology, going back to the podcast I just listened to, technology I think is a brilliant way of solving inequality. And I think you can't ask, say, maybe an office supplies company to become mechanical engineers, or design systems better for. I mean, resources can only go so far when it comes to adapting to a diverse workforce. But like I said, some of these things are anomalous. I don't think that they're problems worth ignoring. I think they're problems worth fixing. But I think maybe, especially considering how technological the world has become, it's uh, it's probably it's probably in the realm, and considering that the workforce is going to be automated and all this stuff. I mean, I think it's probably a technology issue, and I don't think that a psychological approach to it is the most helpful. I mean, how are you going to get 7 billion people into some psychological program? Or, you know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit, but I mean, that is kind of what they're suggesting, you know? Anyway, that's all I got to say. Bye.